podcast where we talk all about fire alarm. I am joined by my co host today, Mr. Chris Godwin. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Brian. Hey, Charles.
And also by our other co host, Mr. Charles Ullman.
Howdy,
Hello, Charles.
gentlemen.
I hope everybody's doing well. Well, first of all, I want to start off talking about training and what is the best way to advance my career. So I'm a technician out in the field. I want to move up. I want to do more things, make more money. It's all about the money, baby. What can I do to advance my career? Charles, we'll start with you. How did you advance your career in fire alarm?
Well, when I started, I assume it was like a lot of folks. I didn't really have any experience in the industry. And I started working for a residential security company. We did residential alarms primarily. And for me, education is important. So I sought out training wherever I could. And I discovered that fire alarm actually had codes and standards that govern what we do. And that was really interesting to me. So I, through the grapevine, heard about something called NISET certification back in the early 90s. And there was this really goofy guy who worked at our local distributor, helped me put together my NISET plan. His name was Brian McLean. Does that ring a bell with anyone?
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say somebody else's name that we both know, but anyway.
Yeah, and I started working to get my NISET certification then. It took 10 years to go from NISET 0 to NISET 4 for me, working in the industry, changing jobs, studying for NISET tests, and finally in 2002, I was able to achieve NISET Level 4 certification.
Awesome. So all in all, you say that all that time and money going towards that NISET certification to get that Level 4 certification, was it worth it?
Absolutely. Training and education is something that's continuous for as long as we're in any career path. Fire alarm and low voltage is especially true. This is a technology-driven, code-driven industry. We have to really stay on top of education.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Chris, tell us about your experience. How did you advance your career?
Well, when I got into fire alarm, I had left the field of EMS, and with EMS, there is your local license, but there's something called the National Registry. And when I moved over to fire, I saw that you could have a local licensing, but hey, there's also this national thing. So I actually ended up getting the national thing, NISET certification, before I even got my local licensing. And it wasn't something that is needed down where I was doing work in Southern Nevada. You don't need it. And because I actually went the extra mile to get it, I was actually questioned by my employers, like, why did you do that? You don't need it. They didn't look at that as a benefit. They looked at it as like, that's extra steps you don't need to take. But eventually, through everything that I had learned with learning how to use the code for the exam, learning what the code actually says, learning and learning, which, if we're talking about the fastest way to advance your career, learn more as much as you can, just through that simple learning of how to utilize the books and everything else. They actually ended up realizing, like, this guy's not stupid. He knows a little bit of stuff. He's got a pretty good understanding of how work needs to be done and what the code actually has to say about it. So just because I ended up getting my NISET certification and learning much more about the code and the industry, I ended up getting moved over from where I started with inspection and testing over into the service side at a rate that company's never done before. And that extra push helped me to keep on moving on over through to design as well. So if we're talking about the fastest way to advance through the field, learn. Learn as much as you can, and it never hurts to have additional certifications.
Absolutely.
And one
So,
thing I'd like to add on that, Brian, being a former Nevada resident, NICET is required in Nevada, but not for technician level work.
Right.
NICET's required to sign plans in the state of Nevada. They put that requirement in place. Either NICET level 2 or professional engineer has to sign plans.
Wow.
Back to you.
All right, interesting. So, as you fellows know, my career path has been a little different than yours. I have not worked in the field as a technician. I spent my entire career prior to NTC in distribution. And when I got started in distribution, I was a warehouse guy. And as a warehouse guy, I'd pack boxes, pull equipment, stuff like that, pull orders, did all the warehouse guy stuff. But there was a lot of downtime as a warehouse guy. I wasn't always being asked to pull an order or pack a box. So in that downtime, I would look at equipment. I'd open boxes, I'd read equipment manuals, I'd look at data sheets, I'd start to learn the product that I was dealing with. And I'd learn about burglar alarm, I'd learn about video, I'd learn about access, and of course, I'd learn about fire alarm equipment and kind of develop an understanding of how this equipment worked, how it went together, parts and pieces. Started delving a little bit into the code, discovered the codes, discovered NFPA 72, and this is back when NFPA 72 was alphabet soup, i.e., 72 A B C D E F type of thing, when there was 6 different parts or whatever to it. So I got a hold of those and I'm reading those and I really took an interest to it. And based on that interest, I was able to move up within the organization. I was able to move up to sales when a opportunity came up to open a branch in Tampa. I was the guy. I was selected for that position for another distributor that I worked for. Um, or in a distributor I worked for, rather, I was able to move over to systems where I really increased my knowledge because I dealt with a lot more from technical aspects of video, access, intrusion, and fire alarm. And then my last job in distribution prior to coming to work for NTC, I did worked as national sales manager because of my background, because of my extensive knowledge of all the categories and my sales experience. They said, well, we want you to be national sales manager, which I did for a period of time as well. So by leveraging my time in distribution and leveraging my thirst for knowledge, I was able to go from a warehouse guy making not much more than minimum wage to national sales manager making a decent living. And that's something that anybody can do. But again, I think all three of our stories show that you have to have that internal motivation. That, like many things in life, as I tell my daughters, the good things in life you have to fight for, you have to work for. Good things in life are not given to you; you have to earn them. And I think you guys would agree with that.
Yeah, Brian, I can speak for myself. Passing the NICET test wasn't a one and done kind of a deal. It's a process. It took me more than one exam to pass most levels. I don't know how your experience was, but it's challenging to move through that career path and training in NICET.
Absolutely. Well, NICET was so impressed with my experience when I sent it in, they just gave me level 4 right away. They didn't even make me take a test. We
Yeah,
all know that's BS.
it was my good looks that got me certified.
There you go. There you go. But yeah, I just like you, Charles, I struggled with the NICET exam. I did not. You and I tested in work element, and we did not get to our desired levels. And I have 4 different NICET certifications, and the fire alarm one obviously was the most challenging one. And we did not get to our desired level of certification in one exam. Chris, I know you tested in CBT and computer based, and you had a similar experience. And even with your motivation and field background and your initiative to become NICET certified, and working with NTC prior to getting training from NTC prior to taking the exam, it was still a challenge. You still had to work at it and learn
Yeah,
how to pass this exam.
absolutely. And it was you know, moving from one exam to the next for each level, it changes and you have to stay on top of the motivation to do it. You got to stay on top of it. You got to stay focused on, pushing through it, move to the next step of it. So,
Yep, absolutely. It's all about you guys and gals. Nobody's going to do this for you. They're not going to hand it to you. You're going to have to put in the effort. All right. Well, next thing I'd like to talk about is a code discussion. I'd like to talk about a part of the code that I find that most fire alarm people aren't familiar with until they encounter it on the NICET exam at level 3 and 4. And that's in the IBC in section 908, excuse me, which is emergency alarm system. So, Chris, what's an emergency alarm system?
An emergency alarm system, from what we get coming out of the IBC, is not a fire alarm system. It is a system that is specifically for an emergency within a group H occupancy, H being hazard. So, storage of any kind of chemical hazards, you're going to have them in, I believe, power plants also fall under H with that. Things like that, where you have hazardous materials. And if there is the exposure of those hazardous materials, these emergency alarm systems are to activate, are they're not to activate, they're to be activated manually in most cases to alert the people of something's going on, whether that is evacuation or, as Brian likes to put it, uh, a muster call to bring everybody to one specific location to talk about what to do next and things of that nature.
Yep.
So
And I probably
that's,
should differentiate between a mustard call and a ketchup call, right?
yes,
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 different thing.
yeah, different kind of calls.
Yep. And
Catch
it's
up
interesting.
is it's too late. You need to move now.
Yep, there you go. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, and it's not, the key thing is here, it's not a fire alarm system because fire alarm systems generally are evacuation systems. They could be relocation, but generally evacuation, and it's a different type of signal. So Group H, hazardous locations, they have materials that constitute a physical or health hazard. And there is a Group H, the H5, that requires a fire alarm system according to the IBC 907, and smoke detection when they have certain chemicals involved as well. But in general, Group H's may require an emergency alarm system. And that's something that we need to understand as fire alarm people. That's not the same thing as a fire alarm, different type of signal, different type of action. Now, with a Group H, as Chris said, manually initiated, generate a local alarm, but are required to report to a monitoring station or to a constantly attended location. So if there's a Group H, there may be an opportunity to pick up some monitoring, or it's going to go to a constantly attended location. And the interconnection or the relationship with fire alarm is that it initiates a supervisory signal on the fire alarm if there is a fire in the building. So there's still going to be an interconnection if both systems exist in the building, but the signal to the fire alarm, because again, we don't want to put the fire alarm in alarm, that may cause an undesirable action. We're just going to initiate a supervisory on the fire alarm. Charles, I
And
know you have some exposure to this. I'm sorry, Chris.
it's all
You have
good.
some exposure to this. You were telling us earlier about a hazardous, or excuse me, an emergency alarm system you'd worked on way back in the 90s.
Yeah, that particular one was manual, as you described. And from different parts of the plant, people could notify a constantly attended location, hey, we have an emergency. And from that location, they'd hit the button. Uh, so that was 30 plus years ago. Requirements have changed since then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chris, you wanted to add something?
I was just gonna say, having it tie in with the fire alarm and only being a supervisory, it does make sense because again, H hazard, and with that in mind, we might not want whatever is inside, and having the emergency alarm system being set off because of it's been activated off that. We don't want whatever is inside getting out. So having
Right.
it trip an alarm that would be the same as evacuating the building could cause, more issues with that. So that kind of makes a bit of sense. It sends supervisory back to the panel. And then if a panel is connected off site, it's going to send a supervisory off site to alert too. So it makes a little bit of sense in that regard.
Absolutely.
And
Next,
Brian, on a practical note, do fire departments have hazmat units?
a lot of them do, yeah, and particularly if they're in a
So
jurisdiction, yeah.
if there was toxic or hazardous material that could leak out, might we want to notify the fire department?
Absolutely. And that's the whole, I think, one of the reasons why the monitoring station or the attended location, so that somebody can notify the fire department. And again, the response to, maybe in some chemicals, you can't put water on them. That's going to
Yeah.
cause an even bigger issue than actually going there. You may providing an alert to the fire department, having some sort of notification to the fire department that there is this particular chemical situation may require a different response than if a fire in the building. And you're right. Fire departments, a lot of times, if they're in a jurisdiction that has one of these Group H locations, they probably have a hazmat team or people on the team are specially trained to deal with whatever the chemical is in that particular building. All right, guys. Well, next one thing I'd like to talk about is our question from the field. And our question from the field today is, how frequently are fire alarm systems required to be tested? Chris, I'll let you lead off with this one. How frequently are fire alarm systems required to be tested?
The answer is yes. The
Yes.
answer is yes. They are. It depends, but if we're talking about a overall frequency, everything has to be tested annually. Now, with that in mind, depending on the device, the appliance, depending on whatever the battery is, you may have more frequency to that. So, first thing we got to look at is inspection and test are two separate things that get mixed up when we look at it from a code perspective versus the field perspective. Most technicians that do inspection and testing, if they're out there to go do an inspection, it encompasses all of that, both aspects. The eyes on, look and make sure everything looks right, and the testing and make sure everything works. However, from a code perspective, those are two different things. And you have much more frequency on the inspection side than you do on the testing side. And it's going to vary depending on the device, the appliance, your equipment, whatever is being used, on how often you're doing an inspect versus how often you're doing a test.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, again, the answer is yes. How often does it need to
There
be
you
done?
go.
Yes. Yes, it does.
So, Charles, does the type of fire alarm system, i.e., a monitored or unmonitored fire alarm system, make a difference as to the inspection interval?
Absolutely, it does, and that's detailed in Chapter 14. It'll specifically identify whether it's monitored or unmonitored and what the frequency is. Most fire alarms that we practically install are monitored. So, really, that's the primary one we'll be looking at. You may occasionally run into an unmonitored system, but
Yep.
More and more that's becoming infrequent. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And I think a big driver of this, well, first of all, usually it's the legacy fire alarm systems that are unmonitored. And any smart fire alarm company is going to say, well, I'm putting in this fire alarm and the IBC requires monitoring. So it's going to be a monitored fire alarm anyway. But hopefully they go back to the customer and say, hey, that unmonitored fire alarm, we need to put monitoring on it as well. And I think a great selling point for that for the fire alarm company is that monitored fire alarms require fire alarm control panels. Let me clarify here. Fire alarm control panels require annual inspection and testing, but unmonitored fire alarm control panels require weekly inspection. So it's one of those things where, gee, if I put monitoring on it, I get better service, and I can go to an annual inspection as opposed to going out and look at that panel every week and documenting the work that I did, because documentation is important. And it certainly makes sense from a cost effectiveness perspective for the property owner, for sure.
And
Well,
this
another
applies to employees too. You wouldn't want to have unmonitored employees running around causing chaos everywhere, would you?
True, true. And you've worked in situations like that. I've had employees that require much direct supervision. I'm sure when you worked in the field, you had a lot of employees that require direct supervision as well.
No doubt.
What the other thing that's interesting about inspection and testing, that we may have variables for the same device. I'll give you an example. VRLA, valve regulated lead acid batteries, what we commonly call lead acid batteries, or sealed lead acid batteries more directly. They have an interval of semi-annual for inspection and testing. But if we're looking at the inspection and testing, but there's also a replacement load test that's required every 3 years. So every 3 years on those VRLA batteries, we either have to replace them or we have to load test them, which could take a couple hours. So it depends upon the device. Chris, what about control valve supervisory and water flow?
Luckily, with that, you're doing semi-annual inspection and test per 72 on both of those. But if you're going out there with a sprinkler technician, they have a different frequency of that. So you got to figure out what does the AHJ want me to look at on how often we need to be out here for fire alarm. But yeah, with your control valve, your water flow, from a strictly fire alarm perspective, that is a semi-annual inspection and semi-annual testing of those devices.
Yep.
Other devices for sprinkler have different frequencies, and typically it's going to come down to, semi-annual and annual on those. But
Yep.
water flow and the control valve, what we usually call the tamper,
Yep.
you're going to be looking at semi-annual for inspect and test.
And Chris brings up an excellent point. From the fire alarm perspective, NFPA 72, our code tells us that it's semi-annual inspection and testing. Now, the sprinkler people's code, NFPA 25, tells them something different, or may tell them something different depending upon the condition, whether or not the valve is supervised or not. And so, from the fire alarm perspective, we do that semi-annual inspection and test. The sprinkler people have their own thing that they're working from. And ideally, we coordinate with them anyway, so we can do both functions at once. But sometimes they're going to be out there on their own or doing their own thing outside of what we are doing. Charles, smoke detectors have a really interesting requirement for inspection and testing. Would you talk about that one?
Sure. Smoke detectors have to be functionally tested and they have to be sensitivity tested. So
Yes.
both of those are requirements. In some cases, modern fire alarm panels can do the sensitivity testing on their own. In other cases, older models, we have to actually test a certain number of smoke detectors to make sure they're within that sensitivity limit.
Yep, absolutely. And Charles, can I functionally test a smoke detector with a magnet?
No. You can't test it with a magnet or with a fork or a knife or any other implement.
There you go.
Functional testing has to have smoke enter the chamber to make sure that we have activation of the device. The device actually functions the way it's supposed to.
Exactly. And that's one common misconception because a lot of the smoke detectors have magnetic test options where you can introduce a magnet to test it, but that is not a functional test for a smoke detector. And you're right. Testing is defined as introducing stimuli to the detector to make sure it responds. So in the case of a smoke detector, what does it respond to? Smoke. We have to introduce smoke to it. Chris, how much smoke should we introduce to the detector? This is another personal pet peeve of mine.
Well, as the kids would say, the smoke detector wants all the smoke.
There you go.
That being said,
The whole
no,
can.
you're doing a very quick half a second to 1 second spritz, if you will. It is a very quick, psh, there you go, that's it, and then you wait. And also, there's a specific way of doing it. Like, you know, don't be right in front of the detector a few inches away and fill up the whole chamber. No, that caused it to fall out of sensitivity range. You got to be at least 12 inches away from it. You give it that quick half a second, 1 second spritz, and then you wait. If it doesn't happen in 10 seconds, start again.
Yep.
Chris, I don't think I got that spritz noise down. Could you demonstrate that one more time?
Just a quick shh.
Thank you.
That's all it is.
Well, Chris, one thing you mentioned earlier is about jurisdictional requirements, and we do a lot of work for the military. And one of the things that we encounter with the military is uniform facilities criteria. Does the military view testing of fire alarm equipment, particularly pulls, smokes, and heats, a little differently than NFPA 72 does?
Absolutely, they do. In that document, the UFC, Uniformed Facilities Criteria, right? Uniform
Yep.
facilities. I got it right this time. All right.
Yep.
Um, with that document, it actually states within the document that the requirements of NFPA 72 are, quote, excessive.
Yes.
And I find that actually to be kind of funny because 72 is like it's your bare bones minimum. This is the floor. This is the starting point. And then this other document saying, yeah, that's too much. That's too much. No. So it does really depend on your jurisdiction on how often you're doing it. Now, if you are utilizing something like the UFC, that is going to be what that document is going to be what the jurisdiction has adopted, even though it states that NFPA 72 is excessive. Are we meeting 72 with the requirements? Well, if you're going with the UFC, you might not be going with those same requirements, but it's up to what the jurisdiction adopts. And that puts it into a weird kind of situation of
Yep.
which one do I go with? Well, you're probably going to go with the UFC in this instance.
Yep. Absolutely. You're always going to make your local AHJ happy. That's for sure. All right. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the lively conversation today. And as always, I want to ask our listeners to please like and subscribe. And guys, until next time, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Brian.